The Old School is brought to you by Ahart Solutions, which provides school surveys and applied research. More information at ahartsolutions.com. Good morning, and welcome to the Old School podcast about a host of things, primarily the American education system, but we've been known to dabble, to dip our toes into the realms of various other fields of endeavor. But today we get a little philosophical, and with that, in this endeavor is my good friend, Dr. Stephen Bourgeois. Good
Hey.
morning, Dr. Bourgeois.
Oh, well, good morning to you, sir.
Are
Um,
you okay?
well, I was just thinking that philosophy is my middle name.
I
I'm excited.
thought I was steward.
What? You seem pretty gregarious this morning, full of energy and vim and vigor. What's happening?
Well, as you know, today is the 1st of December.
And
And in the words of the great crooner, Andy Williams, it's the most
oh,
wonderful time of the year
please.
with the kids jingle belling and everyone telling you be of good cheer.
Um,
What's that?
is there an abort button for the podcast? I tend to look down on Christmas songs or Christmas anything. It's not
Maybe
my
your problem with Andy Williams.
that you were doing Andy Williams there.
No, I wasn't doing Andy Williams. I was doing me singing a song popularized by Andy Williams.
Oh, I didn't know that. I guess his version is one of the many versions of that song.
Yes, it is.
And we were just subjected, I mean, treated to Mr. Miller's.
So if you were subjected to use the verb that you coined just now, and you didn't coin it, but you certainly used it. But if you were subjected to a litany of consistently, incessantly playing albums of Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra and Andy Williams and Perry Como, are you telling me that's not a bad day? That you're telling me that's a bad day?
I would listen to them all day if they agree not to sing Christmas songs. Absolutely. I will respect their entire catalog, sans Christmas songs.
Hmm. Well, I don't know what to say to you, Scrooge, but
I get that response. A little people kind of get quiet a little bit, wonder what's happening, but it doesn't work for me. I get grumpy during this month, particularly listening to classical music stations. There's a
they
great one
switch to all
they,
Christmas music all the time.
yeah, and I get angry. I mean, I'll turn it off or come up with a playlist, anything but I don't like it. I think that they should be playing Bach and Vivaldi and Mozart and Beethoven and Rachmaninoff and Chopin. Anything
They
that's
pay
that
it 11 months out of the year. You're not gonna cut them some slack 1 month out of the year.
I'm not going to listen to that for a minute. No, that's not why I pay them. Well, I don't pay them
You pay them.
supposedly. No, they're commercial free with commercials. That's how it works. That bothers me too.
My issue with Christmas, when we used to co-commiserate about the holiday, had more to do with its impact on education than of the holiday itself. But you're saying that your issues with the holiday extend beyond the classroom and goes to the very heart of the Christmas message.
I think so. No, it's not a good time. But I kind of like Thanksgiving. Eating and football is just fine. But that's about it. It's a short list of holiday that I like. That's the one.
Well, boys and girls, I think we've all learned a valuable lesson here. Listen to your old Uncle Ross.
No.
Uncle Steve has got issues.
Yes.
All right. Well, before we get started, I've been for the last several months, I've been gripped by two podcasts that I want to give a shout out to because I like them. Well, one I like a lot, one I like a lot, but I have a caveat to it. The first of them Do you listen to podcasts?
I'll watch them on YouTube, but they're actually real people talking. I don't like listen to audio only, but I'll watch people do. I guess you call them podcasts, sure.
Do you know there's real people talking on the audio only ones too, or
No,
were
it
you aware of that?
could be AI. You can do this with AI, you know. You laugh, but they have very sometimes they attack each other and they call each other on things and they affirm each other. Two
You're
robots.
telling me AI has the capacity to show the charm, the charisma, the witty repartee that you and I show on a regular basis?
Well, we keep the bar pretty darn low here, Miller. But no, I think that if they, AI can learn, meaning they can listen to us, listen to our whole 101 episodes.
102 with this one.
That's right, if we make it through, and then they could copy our voice, our content. We do tell the same jokes about every 3 weeks or so. I
AI could do that.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. But they can also copy our voice. Um, uh, but every once in a while you'll be exceedingly grumpy. They can build that in, and yeah, yeah.
I don't think AI is that sophisticated yet.
Okay,
I have to believe that. Anyway,
challenge accepted. We'll see. Next time we'll do an AI episode. We'll just give them our transcript, and it'll be funny.
all right, very good. So the first one I love a great deal, and this both of these tap into the historical side of me. One is called The Ancients. It is done by the group that does the YouTube channel History Hit. As the name suggests, the focus of the podcast, each episode deals with some aspect of ancient history. It could be a battle, it could be a person, it could be a myth, it could be a whole host of things. The last couple have been very interesting as they've kind of delved into territories they don't typically go into, like ancient South America, ancient Japan, the Arctic cultures of northern Canada. So you've got some really, really cool stuff. The second one is the one I wholeheartedly recommend with a caveat. It's called The American Elections, A Wicked Game. The title coming from a line from a letter by John Adams talking about observing the elections and referring to it as some kind of a wicked game. And basically, it's hosted by Lindsey Graham, not the senator, but rather a longtime radio podcast host. And he just basically goes into a deep dive into each of the elections. So there's like a natural cap on this particular podcast, but so far as I've gone along, I think I'm at the 1820 election. But so far, I mean, it's remarkably researched and very fascinating. It even has some reenactors kind of playing out scenes that are a part of the history being told about the elections. That sometimes can be a bit silly, but on the whole, I find it very, very fascinating. Here's the caveat. The caveat is going to be when I enter into the elections that are within our political memory of our lifetime. This is typically where historians go off the reservation. And if they're able to talk about, say, the Bush years or the Obama years or the Trump years or the Biden years, if they're able to do that in a way that maintains the objectivity of it, it will be pretty impressive, but two, it will no doubt give greater credence to the podcast. So I'm fascinated as to what's lying ahead, but I am extremely I'm in. So far, I'm in on this podcast. So certainly worth if you have an interest in. I've always been interested in presidential elections, and so
Well,
there you go.
it'll keep you occupied for one, because they have a lot of elections to cover before they get up to the 21st century.
Yeah, they do. But I'm still curious. I'm curious about how they handle our more current elections. So,
Oh, well, thanks, Miller. You might just put the link to both of those in the podcast information.
and link it, I shall.
Okay,
So,
you're tech
ladies and
forward.
gentlemen, boys and girls, you can
Yeah.
check out the info page for this particular episode for those links if you share my enthusiasm of all things historical.
We
So
should do this live right now and watch or listen to Mr. Miller put in a link, you know. That would be pretty fun.
it takes some time. I'm still kind of slow at it.
You need to test those links. There are a lot of
Yeah,
cautionary tales.
I'm gonna have it. I'm gonna have it tested, folks, before we
Okay.
we bid adieu. So
Can't be too careful.
anyway, so you were saying before that Christmas makes you angry.
I didn't say that.
Yes,
Yeah,
you
but
did. You
that's
most
quoted
certainly
like
did. You
those
used
historians. I said that playing Christmas songs during at a on a classical radio station during December when they should be playing Mozart or Vivaldi or Beethoven or rock, basically what I just said. Um, that does make me angry, but Christmas itself, no, that's all my problem. I'm a minority of one in that one.
Where does your anger at Christmas music come from? Is it the Christmas music itself, or is it that your favorite music has been subverted for about a month? Where's the anger coming from?
I have trouble with a lot of music because I spent a lot of time during the Christmas season at the piano I mean, lots of private parties, playing in hotels, restaurants, and essentially what they want during that time is 100% Christmas. You know, you may play a jazz standard, throw it in, um, but for the most part, you're playing that whole songbook for about a month, maybe a little bit more, and the pressure is immense to stick to that list. So I've played them so much, and if you don't play something that'll be requested, and somebody will awkwardly go up there and want to start singing and a little sing along. I hate sing-alongs, but that's part of it. Um, that's maybe the biggest part.
You've identified the anger, but you've not explained the anger.
Well, I don't really have a lot. I mean, plus you're hearing these songs on commercials relentlessly. And if you ever go shopping again, you'll hear them, and so it's just too much, and it
The
doesn't.
overexposure.
Well, and I also was a church musician for many years, and once again during that season, we are performing those um, constantly. So they're for me they're worn out, and so that's one of the major issues I have.
Would you agree, though, that no one can write a good new Christmas song? It's like new war protest songs. You know, the hippies tapped into some sort of zeitgeist and they were able to create great music, but it's never worked since. And in that same vein, uh, when you start going beyond the classics, you really start entering into pretty choppy waters. And so maybe the anger is based upon a natural limitation of the music, perhaps.
I don't know. It's there's a lot there, and then there's also personal things. I mean, it happened to be the season both of my parents passed away, and that cuts pretty deeply because it was always associated with family. So there's a little more insight, and yeah, so it's the type of thing that we bourgeois at this point are excited when it is in the rearview mirror.
Would you say it is a productive anger?
What the hell do you mean? Productive anger. Yeah, does it lead to a catharsis? After experiencing pity and fear, there's this moment of outburst and painful
Some sort of
tears.
Zen-like release of the misery?
Yeah, no, I don't. I don't think so. I think we're stretching the metaphor a little bit. I mean, anger may not be the right term for what I feel when I hear a Christmas song in a cloud. I mean, it's more just annoyance. It's like stepping on a fly or something, or
Hmm.
it's annoying more than rage. That would make me pretty superficial, wouldn't it, Herr Miller, if that really set me off.
Well, I think one of the things when you talk about the idea of anger, I'm always curious about the words people use to describe because you can go in a bunch of different directions. To the lesser end of things, you could just simply describe it as you did, as an annoyance or an irritation. And on the far extreme of things, you can speak of a rage or a wrath or kind of a vitriolic, you know, whatever the case may be. So I was reading an article about in the New Yorker, which I don't normally read the New Yorker, but for whatever reason, this article kind of grabbed my attention, and it talked about the use of rage.
Hmm?
And it was written by some philosopher, some philosophy professor, who spoke of the fact that rage could be productive. And two things jump to mind. One is that I'm not sure the philosopher understands what the definition of rage is. And two, because they misunderstand the usage of the word rage, they therefore, their whole paper kind of rings hollow, because what they say is that there are constructive releases of anger, and there are destructive elements in the release of anger, and that it depends upon which side of the fence you fall on as to whether rage can be productive. But I think rage is perhaps the wrong word to use. It also goes into the idea of how we as a culture deal with anger. Everybody nowadays talks about the fact that Americans are angrier than they ever have been. Um, a local radio host here calls it the sardine theory, saying that we're too crowded and therefore we just get too short tempered, and that's why people lose it on the highways, or they lose it in the grocery stores when they're aiming for the same gift for Christmas. Um, for you and what you have studied, you know, in now even what you study, but more about your kind of your personal life, how do you feel that anger have you used the anger? How has anger kind of sidetracked you in your life?
Well, I think rage is maybe a better word than being angry. I mean, are you angry at some individual? Rage can be a little bit more general. I like the poem by Dylan Thomas. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage,
Rage
rage
against the dying.
against the dying of the light. And that captures a lot, the actual rage of, your mortality and knowing of that. Um, that is palpable. Being angry at a person, road rage is probably a misnomer, though people certainly get frustrated, and I do. I mean, I feel like I'm the only good driver on the road, and everybody else are, car crazies. Or as George Carlin said, you're either a moron, look at that moron, or look at that madman. Nowhere in between, except for you. But everybody thinks that they're that you right in the middle. So I could see, that the car is it's a real dangerous opportunity to express your rage because you have a very dangerous machine. You're, but it captures a little bit. I don't know if I answered your question very well there.
My issue had to do with the fact of, I think it's a very good conversation to have about how anger is looked at societally, how people use it or don't use it, the way it's productive or it's not productive. But the beginning of my kind of treatise on this one has to do with the fact that I think the word they used is a word that is nonsensical in some ways. And even Dylan Thomas, I mean, he's angry at something he has no control over, which makes his anger even more illogical and irrational, and it doesn't matter. And so when you talk about rage, I think about rage as some of the worst aspects of how society expresses anger. And it's usually done without thinking, without logic, without reasoning, without rationalism. And therefore, anything done in simply an emotive sort of way is bound to be non-productive and perhaps even destructive.
I don't know. I mean, the Dylan Thomas, I have to go back to that. That's, to me, it's an approach to how you live, and the idea of really retiring and just sitting back and counting the days. But a rage would include continuing to test yourself and work and press forward and fight, to fight the good fight until the very end. I think, as humans, maybe as men, but I don't want to restrict you to that. We have this physical need for anger, and we need to be able to generate it very quickly. And that's something that has probably evolved, and society has gotten rid of that to some extent. But we're still quite dangerous, and that has to be able to happen, and you have a store of that ready to go, and that's why the switch flips rather quickly. The best metaphor I think would be athletics, where that
Mm.
anger you use that, you use fear, of course. Often it's the fear of losing, and also the anger turns on, and that's a very much an acceptable way to express that rage. But if you and we're about to watch football all afternoon, um, these folks are raging, you know, every play. And they have to have that, or they're going to get killed out there. And so I think that we do have that, but we need um, positive ways, socially acceptable ways to get rid of it. Otherwise, it does bubble up, and you've experienced it, as I have, or sometimes for just silly things, we will sort of explode a little bit, because we don't have the outlets like we used to when we were younger.
It is fascinating to look at, the way that, because you mentioned the idea of something like athletic endeavors, and that's a that's a that's not an avenue that many people have available to them as far as how they express their anger or how they use their anger. Certainly, anybody who's involved in, sports or, martial arts or things of that nature, there's like a natural or any kind of physical exertion. There's a kind of a natural outlet for the emotions behind it. But what I'm kind of curious about is how we as a society look at anger. Do we see it as something? Because I think it's changed. Whatever our societal outlook is, and I'm not saying I know the answer to this question, but it seems like our anger or our idea about anger has changed over the last 20 to 40 years. And it doesn't seem like the best way to go about things, the way that we're approaching it today. Whether it's, you know, people talking into the void of TikTok or whatever the case may be, and it brings out the worst excesses of people, whether it's the comment section of an of an article, where you just have to go down just a bit before you get to Hitler, whether it applies or not. There's always these ways in which people express their anger, and it seems like it's become more acceptable to be more rageful and more angry. And I'm wondering where that changed.
Well, the the office, the workspace, the workplace, I think has changed dramatically, where people are just overtly nice, and in times back, generation before, there would be yelling and shouting, it would be over with. But everybody is trying so hard to be nice and not to offend, and picking their words so carefully, um, that the outlet becomes social media or just talking behind people's back. But there rarely are public confrontations anymore, or arguments. I think we've forgotten how to do that, and you should be able to do that productively and not attacking the person, but their point or their ideas. But the social media allows people to hide in the shadows and make these comments, and I guess it's just such a weak example of expressing your rage publicly. Just
Mm,
half-hearted in a way.
mhm. Well, it's also tends to be a bit, or it can be a bit cowardly the way people do it, because you risk nothing, you sacrifice nothing, you expose nothing to any kind of challenge, because you're just sitting there talking and you're surrounded by people who agree with you, you know. It's interesting what you talk about with regards to the workplace being no longer a place of challenging ideas, but kind of this forced notion of politeness for its own sake. Did you ever watch Parks and Recreation?
I watched a little bit of it. I'm interested in watching more. It's actually really funny.
So there's a character on there named Ron Swanson, played by Nick Offerman, and there's a very famous scene that's become a bit of a meme about a broken coffee pot, where he basically challenges the entire office, demanding to know who broke his coffee pot. And of course, eventually, well, not eventually, almost immediately, the various other people turn on themselves in an attempt to try to deflect, and because no one knows who actually broke it. And as it turns out, Nick Offerman broke it, but he said it's starting to get a little chummy around here. Pretty soon they're going to have heads on pikes and stuff. So his idea was trying to break down this rather kind of false nicety that existed in
Like,
the office in an attempt to try to expose what was really going on underneath the surface.
well, there was a little spoiler in that story because those who are about to binge watch it now know the ending to the coffee pot mystery.
But it does kind of speak to this, and there have been, and this is not meant to be political, but there has been an increasing amount of demands that people talk a certain way, that they use certain language, that they use certain viewpoints or whatever the case may be. And I go back to um to go back to George Carlin, who kind of raged, as you say, raged against the idea of political correct language. He thought that political correct language does nothing but obfuscate the real meaning. And so not only are people not using real words, but they're not even able to kind of express the real meaning of those words.
Hmm.
And that too kind of creates its own frustrations. And so maybe this is the teapot that's boiling that cannot escape its situation.
Well, the media, the news media, is responsible for a lot of it. If you could just analyze the words that politicians use, both sides,
Right.
and think about how often they say we've got to fight. They throw the word fight around, you know, so much, but I don't know if that's what they mean. We've got to
Right.
fight, but that type of language, I think, has a cumulative effect. But I don't know that we're seeing it out in real life. I think a lot of the manifestation would be in this digital world.
Well, then then the question, I guess, then becomes, how do you deal with it? How do if our most of our anger comes from some sort of repression, or comes from some sort of lack of healthy ways of expressing it, how do you express it then? How do you change that? How do you make things better?
Just, I mean, we have to eventually just go back to our biology that we're built like that. There's all kinds of good reasons, I mean, that's how it's a survival mechanism. If you think about what Nietzsche said, he said that people are not motivated to survive. He took the Darwin idea as kind of a limitation, but he said it's the will to power. And power is not just this general idea of power or control, but it's to overpower others. And he's saying that that's the fundamental human motivation, is to do that. And we seem to have uh, lost contact with the our instincts. And so I think that these examples of rage are, completely predictable. And, what we're doing is probably unhealthy, with all the careful talk. There needs to be an outlet for that because I think you're right that the anger does seem to be increasing, at least in public discourse. Um, but at the same time, we don't necessarily see it in our real lives. We don't see neighbors or people at a party being anything like they always were. So I think it's something that we're seeing, through the media.
So does that make it less legitimate, or are we responding to something that's fabricated? Is it something that's maybe overblown? Is that, you know, does our very notion of how angry people are, is that really what it is? Or because you're right, you walk down the street, you talk to people in the grocery store, you ask someone for help on something, people, 9 times out of 10, people are willing to help you out. You know, are we as angry as everyone says we are, or
But I mean, the media, and now I'm talking about social media and traditional media, what they, their whole business is to get clicks.
right?
And we get clicks really based upon our instincts.
Mm,
And so they, particularly use fear as a way to attract people to click. They things that we're angry about, they use, and then they use the other, human desires, you know.
right,
Um, so they're kind of hitting us where we live, but um, everything is about fear in network type news.
mm,
And so the idea is that the world's coming to an end, or that if this happens, we're going to have riots in the streets. There's going to be wars. So a lot of it, I think, is fueled by the media. I don't think there's anything structural that has changed. I mean, people have gotten nicer, if anything.
right. Well, I think about how we would have been taught initially as we were growing up. You know, I
Mhm.
think about, so in Christianity, and with Christianity, with, you know, with regards to religion, of course,
Yeah.
Christianity and Judaism are the two faiths that I perhaps know the most about. But, you know, the Bible tends to have like one aspect of looking at anger. And so, like, for example, in Ephesians, it says, in your anger, do not sin. You know, as if anger is this kind of this boiling cauldron in which all matter of things could go wrong, and you could end up, you know, steering off course. In James, it says that for the anger of a man does not produce the righteousness of God.
Yeah.
And so there's all this talk that suggests that anger is something to be avoided. But then I go to a conversation I saw about a Buddhist monk. He was a very famous Buddhist monk, Vietnamese monk. And he was talking to these children. And one of the questions that he got was from this little girl who said, how do I get rid of my anger? And for the monk, his attitude was, your goal should not be to get rid of it. Your goal is to put it in balance with everything else, because anger is natural. And so to get rid of something that is natural is only likely to cause misery. And so therefore, the purpose should not be to get rid of it. The purpose should be to properly redirect it, properly, you know,
Hmm.
fuel other things. Now, this is different from, say, something like the Stoics, where the Stoics felt that anger was, you know, an absence of what it is that you're supposed to be doing. You know, they saw it as a major diversion from the how a good man is supposed to live. They saw it as a, I don't know if they used evil because that has kind of religious terminology to it, but or connotations to it. But for the Stoics, they felt that anger was a useless emotion, and it should be something that should be eliminated. But I can't help but think that part of the reason why, if it can be said that we are an angry people, it's partly because we have the wrong idea of the reasons and the usage of anger. And I can't help but think that perhaps the Buddhists have it right, or at least this Buddhist monk has it right, that it should not be about getting rid of something that's a natural part of who
Right.
you are, but rather should be about how do you properly put it in its place in balance with everything else.
And I think that's the best answer, that you can transform it somehow. I mean,
That's what the
the idea,
football players are doing.
well, sure, and competition, that drive is not just, I want to win, so I'm happy in holding the trophy, but it's to dominate. That's
Mm,
exactly what it is, and that spills over, into business. It's the same thing, and that's one of the drives. But there are ways to use it in a legal way, where you're not running amok, or um So, I mean, you had a pretty raucous youth, and I bet you had a lot of anger, that you worked with, and you've chipped away at that, since I've known you, even,
Yeah.
civilizing aspect. I mean, and I'm kind of, I have this chip on my shoulder, that I would, use, to practice the piano, to get really good at sports and things, but it's still there,
Right.
and I'm sometimes surprised at, when rage comes out, just how sudden it is and how strong it is. And so I don't think it goes away. I think you're absolutely right. But you just need to find a way to channel it.
I think someone said after riots that kind of gripped the country in 2020 and 2021, the fact that, the idea was that civility was a very thinly veiled disguise and that it covered something that was not nearly as far from the surface as one would have you believe. And you're right. When I was younger, I had a chip on my shoulder, I had a temper when I was younger,
Yeah.
and it is something that I've worked on over the years. But you know, when I was in the military, and this is something they encourage too. But I mean,
Uh-huh.
I fought all the time. The idea was that if there was an issue between two people in a squad, they'd put boxing gloves on you, they'd empty out a room, and then they didn't ding ding, and then off you go. It's like Rocky and Apollo Creed at the end of Rocky 3, where they're now hanging out as like
Yeah.
buddies, and they're reliving their glory days. But for us, it was just a constant thing. And I fought with gloves, without gloves, and I had a very volatile personality. I was still quiet, but I wasn't quite like laid back quiet. Like maybe I'm closer to that today than although if you hear some of the podcasts over the last 100 episodes, there certainly are moments where my anger sometimes gets the better of me. But I think for the most part, I'm more the laid back quiet than the simmering cauldron of emotions quiet.
Well, it was good that you got that thing out about the Colts, because that was cathartic for all of us, and you quite frankly haven't brought it up as much since then. So uh, maybe that's a good thing. Um,
It
yeah,
it does it does make us it should challenge us on how we, even from an educational standpoint, how should we handle issues of anger in elementary school? How do we handle it, middle and high school? I think in a lot of ways, we've come into a period of education where counselors feature prominently in this effort. And certainly there's some amazing counselors out there doing some amazing work. Um, I don't know all the ins and outs of their methodology and how they diffuse situations like that. But that seems to be it. It seems like the major emphasis is diffusing, but not necessarily settling things.
yeah, and that's a little bit outside of our field.
Exactly.
What a frustrating business to be in. You know,
This is,
because it's inherently irrational, the
Mhm.
get into the brainstem reaction, and the last thing you want to do is talk them out of it at that point, because they are there. Um, so yeah, I don't really have strategies for that. I'd be the wrong person to, talk to. I was more likely to bring a kid out in the hallway and confront them when they're annoyed, you know,
Yeah.
and just shorten that time period,
Hmm.
but yeah, having kind of a, what do you call it, a bit of a confrontation with students, there were many times when that had to happen, because you
Yeah.
just wanted to get back to class, and so you said, okay, I'm going to deal with this right now, and then everybody's back in.
And I think it serves me well because I was a lot because I had much more of a temper when I was younger.
Yeah.
I didn't have nearly the problem with confrontation, be it with
Mhm.
students, with teachers, with parents, and what have you. Now I learned how to speak like a professional most of the time, and there was a couple of times that slipped, but but uh but in general I was able to handle things like that as a professional. But I think the fact that I did have a bit of a temper, at least at the very least, made me not unwilling to engage in people, where I saw my colleagues they'd go around the barn before they sit there and try to figure out how to actually talk to somebody. And so uh it would be fascinating to see, because you do it. Just do a Google search on methods about anger. Just put that in, or just put in strategies and anger, and you're going to see page upon page upon page of philosophical, religious, you know, social quackery, all everything and everything in between about how to deal with this. So this apparently is an issue that people are dealing with and people are struggling with, either within themselves or trying to deal with it in another person, that apparently it has to be addressed, or at least at the very least it should be talked about.
Yeah, I was surprised that we could cover this much ground in the conversation, but the more I think of it, the data is out there, you
Mhm.
know, and maybe, I mean, they say Americans are angrier than ever before. I'm sure there's a way to make, to present empirical evidence to support that or not.
Mhm. It seems like, as you often say when we have guests on, and it's certainly true when you say it, but it seems like this is just the beginning of the conversation and not necessarily the end of it, because it seems like there's more here to talk about, maybe with somebody who knows a lot more on the subject than we do. We just know it from an anecdotal point of view, not necessarily from any kind of studied or expertise that we have on socio emotional kind of attitudes. But
Yeah, bring them on. I mean, I'm kind of glad that the rage, the anger is still there. I mean, that's part of being alive. But I've had times not that long ago where um, my three computer screens weren't working and I could spend a whole day not doing it, and other frustrations of running a business. And you have maybe I don't share everything about the details, but it can be pretty rugged, being frustrated running a business. And I've had thoughts of breaking up the room. Sometimes, I'll take this cell phone, which I don't like. I don't know if you've ever done this, but during some of those moments, I'll squeeze it sideways as hard as I can. And a few points I thought about, I'm going to break this cell phone, but it was just a moment. Or I've thought about literally breaking up the room. And so it's,
Mhm.
we're still crazy after all these years. We would not be convicted by a jury of our peers.
So one of the words I used to teach students, I used to give students a word of the day every day when I was a teacher, and one of the words I used to do was defenestrate, which is to throw something or someone out a window.
Das Fenster.
Um,
I like it.
say again.
Well, das Fenster in German.
Yeah, and so the idea was that all of us have this kind of emotion,
Hmm.
whether we voice it or not. I am curious though. You said that the anger is proof that we're still human, and that the rage proves that we still feel. Uh, does that suggest that you find the Buddhist approach perhaps not productive? In that Buddha is as Buddhists try, because Inner Peace was the book that was written by this Vietnamese monk. His last name was Han. I think it was. I'll put the link in the description. But in his book, he talked about the fact that that the anger, that the sorrow, that the misery, the purpose is to smile at the misery, to smile at the sorrow. That we are like a television has a million channels, and why should one channel dominate our entire emotional range? If you turn it on anger, then you're going to be angry. If you're going to turn on the smile, you'll have a smile. That there are ways to kind of negate that effect. But you're saying that even in its more uh, just inappropriate uh, scale of things, that anger still serves a purpose that might ultimately be good for us.
Yeah, it's who we are, so we can't argue with nature. There's a short book by Sigmund Freud called Civilization and Its Discontents, and he was arguing that human nature instinct has been thwarted by society to the point where we have all these inner frustrations because our basic desires, our instincts have been civilized. And so we're paying a price. I mean, the alternative isn't really good either. You know, people running wild and doing anything they want, but the human animal has not had enough time to develop, those things away. It's not that
Mhm.
long ago, that we didn't have this layer of civilization. It's sort of a, whatever you would call it. It's a thin partition, I think.
Sure. The Buddhist monk is a guy by the name, his last name is Han, H-A-N-H. I do not want to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce his full name. But he is the one that that had written a lot about not just the Dharma, the Buddhist kind of notions, about who he was and what he did, but he talked about also the notion of how do we calm the mind, how do we live a life where it's a Buddhist idea, the idea of mindfulness. And so, when he wrote his book about, he's written a bunch of books on peace, being peace was one of them. Peace is every step. I mean, the path of mindfulness, that these were practices that he felt were important in how we kind of approach anger and how we see it in relation to other things as well. But certainly worth our time kind of exploring, perhaps, like I said, with a expert at some point later on down the road.
I may have seen this gentleman, or I saw somebody very similar to what you're describing,
Mhm.
that said the secret to happiness is to not care.
Well, I think that's a kind of a, I think in some ways you can look at that as kind of a Buddhist principle. I think in some ways you can also look at it, rather paradoxically as a Stoic principle
Mhm.
that nothing here matters. And so why you would get upset because our time in the grand scheme of the cosmos is so infinitesimally small, our time here on the planet, the fact that we would get upset about anything seems to be ridiculous.
Well,
And so,
yeah,
yeah.
I feel that way, but I mean, think about yourself. You've only been civilized for about 25, 30 years as most Miller. You're just getting used to it.
You got the handle of this stuff. What am I doing?
You sound like Tarzan or something. Yeah.
It is weird because when you talk, and we're at the end of this, but I mean,
Yeah.
it is strange when you confront somebody who is angry over the correctness of being angry.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've seen this a lot with regards to politics. My wife and I'll have a discussion, or I'll have a discussion with a friend of mine, and they're raging. And I was like, why do you care? 20 years from now, we're all gonna be dead. What does it matter? And sometimes the reaction is, why aren't you more angry? And I'm like, I'm not any angry. It's at some point you just have to put it in context with everything else, and you judge whether something is worth being angry about or not. But it is something I think we struggle with. And it could be at the core of why we have some issues, if not as many issues as others would lead you to believe.
Yeah, and maybe it's having too high an opinion of what politicians can do if they're fortunate enough to win. Um, but yeah, I tend not to get too emotional about, quite often it's you're picking the lesser of evils, and these would probably not be your top choices for these roles.
If
And
given the full spectrum of people who could possibly fill those roles, yeah.
incredibly talented people out there who want nothing to do with politics for all kinds of reasons.
I mean, and we are in a world where the Peter principle seems to be in full effect as far as the people who are both leaders and also people who are listened to the most. I remember the comedian Tim Dillon saying that there were an incredible amount of beautiful, smart, powerful, intelligent women in the world. It's just none of them are on the View. And so, whether you
You're
believe it or
bashing
not,
the view. Wow.
I have no opinion one way or the other, but I thought it was a funny kind of remark about the fact that there's a huge difference between the people who are known and perhaps the people that should be known.
Yeah, like the two of us, we should be Joe Rogan, you know. Uh, that would make all the difference, if we had that listenership just for one episode, that's all it would take,
Just throw a million at us. Let's throw a million people. I mean, he's got like 50 million. I mean, let's throw a million at us and see what we can do with that. And if we lose, hey,
I think we can hold on to that million for about one day. Uh, then
you think?
then you'll see the numbers plummet, which will be kind of exciting too.
Can you imagine how big our listener map would be on our analytics page of of our podcast thing? So
Well, now we're starting to sound like we're drunk here, Miller. You better close us out.
I better close this out. Say goodnight, Grace.
Uh,
Say goodnight, Gracie.
Good night, and auf Wiedersehen here, Miller.
Auf Wiedersehen, Herr Dr. Bourgeois.